It's been like. We're gonna wait for Professor Cuchtamo. Hi. That's my name.
Yes, ma'am.
I can recognize you guys. Welcome. All right, Professor Cuchtamo, and the featured artist is being called. Our featured artist, Haytham Nawar. Okay, we're ready. We're ready to start. Take your honorary seats. Is that good for you? It's fine? All right. Thank you for coming, everybody. It's a real pleasure to start the first week with so much going on and so much that's related to bread and to some of our basic human qualities that actually require artists and scientists to come together. Artists, scientists, technologists, engineers, philosophers, psychologists, everybody. This is our monthly Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. It's a shorthand for laser. And one of the students thought it was going to be a laser show. I'm sorry to disappoint you. But it's still going to be an interesting show of people. We have 4 wonderful people who are going to speak tonight. Lasers have started about 7-8 years ago in San Francisco. They were initiated by Piero Scaruffi from Italy. I think it was Stanford that started it first. And last year, the count was 30 places around the world are now hosting these events where artists and scientists come together, share ideas, and then the audiences also share and connect. And a lot of collaborations come out of these evenings. So just one little thing for you to know, where the whole thing originated is in 1959 by Frank Malina, who was actually a space engineer here working actually in Caltech. And when there was a blacklisting time, he moved to Paris. In Paris, he met so many artists, and he started thinking, wow, these artists also do a bunch of amazing research, and they're doing a lot of things that nobody's writing about. It's only art historians that are writing afterwards. So why don't we create a journal that actually shows the communication and publishes writings by artists about the research they do together with scientists. This, believe it or not, it started in 1969. So we have been celebrating 50 years of this, believe it or not. And the universities are still segregated in North and South Campus. So it's great to have this happening here, to have it growing so beautifully. And I hope that you guys continue this tradition. We're going to start with our featured artist. If you haven't seen the show, if you just walked in, make sure to, at the end of this, walk down this way and go into the gallery because it's a fantastic show. And tonight, if you were wondering why we're serving bread, you will know in a minute. So welcome, Haytham Nawar.
So thank you, Victoria, again, and thanks for the Art Sci and UCLA for hosting me here. Today I will speak about my project, which is a Collective Bread Diaries, Taste of Protest. So if we talk about bread, there, of course, historically speaking, there is a lot to know about bread. I will start where I come from Egypt, with the ancient Egyptians and how it was important for them bread, also beer. So if you, of course, you know about Egypt and you know about how it was very important for Egyptian to the afterlife and how it was very holy and sacred for them, what they keep for the journey for the afterlife. So one of the most important things was actually bread. So here that you see in all the tombs and temples that always it's their drawings of the bread that they will take with them to in the afterlife. And this is more than 3,000 years bread. It was one of the tombs that you see the bread and dry fruits and the grains that it always in the journey with the Egyptian in the tombs. So again, and even after the Greeks and the Romans, it was very important that Egypt have the grains all come from Egypt, and even the modern time with Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, it's also very important in all Abrahamic religions that also bread is very known as a symbol of holy, like in Christianity, the bread and the wine and the blood and the meat and so on. But my really personal interest about the bread when it comes in 2011 and the uprising in the Middle East was what we call in the Arab Spring, and especially in Egypt, when people start to protest in the Tahrir Square and using the loaves of the bread as a symbolic meaning for the protest. And for the ones who know a little bit of Arabic, the word bread, it means in Arabic aish, and literally it means bread, but at the same time it means to live. And actually also that kind of bread, which is very, very cheap, and that's 99% of people, they eat that kind of bread. It's called aish baladi, and the word baladi, it means hometown. So, homeland. So the two words, it's very meaningful. It's actually the right to live, and this is my homeland. And that's why the very simple-minded people, they use it in Tahrir Square to carry in the hand. And that's different images from the Tahrir Square about the people that are holding the bread in their hands. Then more, when I started to make deeply in the research, that was not just actually an Egyptian act of protest, but it was also in the US here, it was also in France, in Iran, Sudan, Tunisia, many other countries during the history, they used bread as an act of protest. I started in 2013-14 my Bread Diaries, which is drawing and producing a lot of drawing about bread and collecting different kind of bread. And I collected like my Bread Diaries, which is like dedicated 365 drawing every day a drawing of a bread. And I exhibited that work in 2014. And after learning a lot about the bread, and it's actually from different culture, then I said, why it's always to be my diary, but could be also a collective diaries. And it's just an act of protest, not just only by me as an Egyptian, but also could be from all human beings, like all as a universal act of protest. And if I want to collect voices or bread from all over the world, that nowadays I will not go and travel and collect bread. So I will use the platform, and one of the things we actually discussed together, the idea of using with Victoria to use Mechanical Turk. And for the ones they don't know, Mechanical Turk is an online platform owned by Amazon, which they call it an artificial intelligence system that collect data in any form as information or images or drawings, and the machine learns from the human, the pattern of the human behavior. So as much contributors to the system, the machine learns by itself. So I did create a task that asking people from all over the world that I want drawing of bread from all over the world as an act of protest, that every drawing is an act of protest, like a voice from everywhere. And surprisingly, people start to send me bread from all over the world. And it was really very nice that I have bread from the 5 continents, from Australia to the US, Egypt, Iran, China, everywhere. And they came the bread here. This is some of the drawings I have, which I have now more than 100 bread drawings, but I choose only 100 which are exhibited here. And actually, most of them are the original drawing in that book, which you will see it inside the gallery. And then the process that I wanted to exhibit this bread. So since I used the Mechanical Turk, and Mechanical Turk was, like the first system that can call artificial intelligence in the 17th, 18th century. And that's why Amazon actually have this name as Mechanical Turk. It's a machine thing, like the first artificial intelligence machine, which was a fraud in the end. But I wanted to produce them to be drawn by a machine, not by a human. So I'm a human, I assigned the task to a machine, which is the Mechanical Turk, that send the task to humans. They contribute their own drawing, their own bread, to the Mechanical Turk, to a machine that I approve it as a human and then send it again to the machine, which is the cutter plotter inside, and then it produces the work. I was very much interested by the complexity between human and machine and the relationship between them. Here's some of the images you would see inside more. I have exhibited like around 30 bread loaves. Some of images here and there. And of course, during the research, went through a lot of political, economical, and cultural, religious aspect of bread that I didn't know before, such as bread in Africa was very much influenced by French, and but have different name and different ingredients. But it was, again, it's a kind of post-colonial way of like cultural post-colonial thing that you see bread all over the world, but it's actually coming from different culture, and as well as the variety and diversity of bread in such places like in the US, and how it's very minor and very limited in a poorer country, and why. Many questions raised because of the research, and that gives really a rich aspect of why I choose bread. And here's the gallery, Andrew and and Michael, how they helped to make it happen in the last 3 days, and that's just 1 hour ago. Thank you.
Jonathan. Oh, come on.
Perfect.
Jonathan.
So in every one of these meetings, we try, at least I try, to also include some of the work that graduate students in the Design Media Arts department do. And I look for students who somehow connect nicely with what we're doing. So the person I picked for tonight is Jonathan Moore. And he will tell you about his pretty cool work that he's doing.
So it'll pop up. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's really hard to talk about work in a short period of time, so I'm gonna speak kind of quickly, but I can't talk about everything, so I'll have to skip some slides. But you can always look at my website. My name's Jonathan Moore. I came from this industry, the industry of making spectacle. More specifically, the world of visual effects. And most CG artists, which is what I was, the ultimate goal is to create a representation of reality that is, representation of reality that rivals reality on a scale that the real no longer seems real enough. This is a CG image, if you can't tell. And so a lot of what I've been interested in with my arts practice and research at UCLA has been looking at the line between art and non-art, and more specifically, this is the work of Jeff Wall, who is a photographer, whose work itself is actually a lie. It's not a real, like it's a recreation of a fictional event. But what I'm interested really is about the ability to create an image of this sort that is not real, but it says something real about society, something a little more, through the act of lying, what can we learn? And so this is another image as well that he did. I'm gonna try to skip through because we don't have a lot of time. This is Ilya Kobakov, who does work about creating models of places that are inaccessible to us. In this case, this is a representation of a classroom from Chernobyl, but in Marfa, Texas. And so this idea of narrative and storytelling, and how the act of storytelling often can be used either to lie or to illuminate truth in some way. Maybe more, what's the word? Yes, but also, yes, and also magical, I guess, or illusionistic is the work of Leonardo Ehrlich, who creates spaces that are far more playful and surreal, but through that act of doing that allows us to maybe look at the world with a little more skepticism. This piece, this is really hard to talk about because it's a really strange piece. This is documentation from the first thing that large project I created while I was at UCLA. And this project was I basically created a security checkpoint within the gallery. And the point being twofold. One, because this was right around the time that President Trump unfortunately created the travel ban, which was to prohibit the flow of people throughout the United States for obviously arbitrary and unknown reasons to most of us, and misguided principles on their own, and also just the rise of the alt-right and all these other issues that are coming up. And so beyond that, though, there's also the same elements of art or non-art, people coming to the space and not knowing, oh, wait, this is clearly not real, it's a fake space, but how do people actually suspend disbelief, and how does that affect them? So the other flip side of this is being an abstracted version of security checkpoint, but also a sociological look at how do people respond? How do they either accept and go along, play along with it, or how do they actually use this as in some ways as a form of protest? But it's just an interesting aspect to see how that goes. So I'm going to try to pick a spot that kind of gives you a little idea of this. Is there sound by chance?
There
Or
is.
there is.
You'll have to adjust the volume.
Oh, gotcha. Down here. All right. I don't know how loud this is going to be. Well. Wah, wah.
The sound on the laptop is not.
Well, I mean, it's not even playing, so let's see.
Maybe try to reload it.
Yeah, I think that might do it.
Look who's there.
This is not wanting to play. This is really sad.
Just had it playing a minute ago.
You're
Mm-mm.
just playing it?
Yeah.
If I go to, do you have this in a folder by chance?
It should be in shared. It's the most recent that we shared.
Okay, so I can access it from there. That's great. Sorry, y'all. Always technical issues. Okay, so we are here. So I'll try my best with this. Wah, wah.
Maybe talk about it.
There we go.
Do you need this?
Sorry.
Have you had any neurological work done? Turn around.
Sorry.
We're hearing the same thing.
So the entire environment was constructed, made of MDF, materials that are clearly not real. But what's really interesting is how people respond to this. And as much of an interrogation as you would expect it to be from a normal experience, it was abstracted from that. So it was looking more about like your dreams, your desires, questions about your family. And part of this was also, I definitely have read in repressive regimes, often the last place for people to find solace is actually in your thoughts. Like it's an adage I've definitely heard from time to time. And with things like Cambridge Analytica, where you have advertisers and political groups that are watching and surveilling the way we act and what we do on the internet through our actions, in some ways have more of an ability to predict and understand what we are doing than we ourselves are and what we're thinking. And so it's maybe a loose connection, but it's one that I thought about. Like, where do people go when even your thoughts are being in some way predicted? Our actions are predicted, what we think and what we feel. And maybe for me, one of the most interesting aspects of this project was, let's see if I can find it. This was really strange. I'm not going to, you can just watch it. So it's hard. I don't know how to often. I'm still learning how to like talk about my work because it's complicated, and it deals with like the complexity of like narrative in the real world. Like how do we look and think about things? What does it really mean to live in the world that we do, being that it is so complex? And so I guess the next thing I would want to talk about really briefly, or try to address, is the project I did this past October. And again, this idea of gallery space and contextualizing art, both when and with inside and outside of the space. One of the things that I'm personally very interested in is automation and how that is actually, aside from climate change, it is one of the largest things that I think will have the most, I'm losing a word again. It's the most immediate impact that could have on the fabric of society across the globe. How are jobs replaced, and are new jobs created fast enough? There's all these things about identity and how we, especially in the United States, how we identify ourselves in society and the value that we give ourselves based on what we do for a living, or having a job, or going into an office, for instance. And millions of people still go into offices every day, and that's how that gives people self-worth. And so there's a lot of questions about universal basic income and all these other things about like how will this change society for the better or for the worse? And so that's really a large part of the inspiration for this. The other aspect was I myself working in a very corporate space of animation, both DreamWorks and Disney Animation. So a lot of the disenchantedness that I had went into this work a little bit as well, of that experience. So I'm going to show you just a quick clip from that. Excerpt from a piece. I'm still working out ways to display that. Oh, okay. And it says to do Roxanne documents, preprint, citizenship proof, H-1B1 notice of action, UBI eligibility form. UBI requirements: lack of work greater than 2 years, median income prior to work less than $50,000, obtained pre-approval from IRS. What day is it? And I know it's a sound thing, but I have to talk over it a little bit, so bear with me. Each of these objects in the space, all the office equipment, was actually automated. So it all had sensors and things connected to it to sort of animate the objects themselves in the space. So the copy machine, when you walked up to it, it would actually copy, change its settings, enlarge, shrink. All of the functions that were available to this copy machine would be changed and adjusted based on the whim of the copy machine. The computer itself was doing work itself. It was typing and updating, as you can see on the screen. The printer was printing, depending on who was in the space, if anyone, or where the performer was in the space. The actual water cooler is gurgling continuously. It's on a loop in itself. And this is an office where time has stopped. And really it was about the poetics of how do people deal with being stuck in a place where they, in some ways, whether it's through the economic input they get from it, whether being able to pay their bills, in a place where they may not see a future for themselves. And in addition to that, the anxieties that come up from where does the future lead for them in a place where their job is, they can see it leaving on the horizon, no longer existing. Where does that lead to them? And so, yeah, it was a performance. And as you see it now, clips of films, fragments of an experience. And there's shoes that fall from the ceiling occasionally. Okay, and that's all I got. All right, thank you all. Close that, yeah.
Bill.
So we have an artist here visiting, Bill Fontana, who actually gave a talk during our noontime lecture. Yesterday he met with our grad students, and everybody's blown away by the sound and the fact that we have to listen more to each other, the environment, our buildings, everything around us. We're kind of losing the sense of listening. Yesterday we went to the anechoic chamber. Dr. Seth Pederman allowed us to go in. And it was a fantastic experience, especially with Bill Fontana, who talked about the space in a way that completely opened up the possibility of art and science coming in a very interesting way, to the point where Dr. Putterman, who's a physicist, came to his talk today, and they actually had a small dialogue, and we may see some interesting collaboration coming out, which makes me so happy. So please welcome Bill Fontana.
Is the sound connected?
It is connected. It might be a little loud though, like place.
Okay. So, were any of you at my talk at lunchtime today? So, excuse me if I'm repeating some of the same stuff you heard, but to make a long story short, in the in the 60s, I was a music student, a composition student, and I became fascinated with the act of listening and how my perception, focused perception of ambient sound wherever I was a creative act. And I my position became the act of listening was a way of making music, but in a traditional music conservatory in Cleveland, they thought I was just really kind of strange. And I was looking for an alternative place to be going to school because the Vietnam War is going on and I didn't want to go in the military. And I found that John Cage was teaching a class in New York at the New School called Experimental Music Composition, and I went there, and he loved this idea. I mean, because that was really his idea, actually. And I think the real difference between Mr. Cage and myself is he was still very focused on the concert hall and the performative act of music. You know, his famous silent piano piece, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, David Tudor gets on a stage and very formally opens the lid of a grand piano and sits with a clock for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and then whatever sounds and reactions an audience had to this was really the sound of the piece. And in some situations, I was told, like in Berlin, when this was done, people got really angry. Sculpture, the idea of sculpture, to me means a physical embodiment of some aspect of the human condition. And I've always been really interested in the physics of sound and how, in my working process, I work with underwater sound with hydrophones. I work with vibration sensors called accelerometers, and of course normal microphones. But I sort of see, I'm interested in the relationship between physical vibration in the air and how it affects materials like bridges and structures. I made a recording earlier today of the Richard Serra sculpture with an accelerometer, and it's kind of a very beautiful sound. I sent you a link to it.
Yes, thank you.
And maybe you can post it or share that.
I will for sure.
I was in Kyoto a couple of years ago at a very famous Buddhist temple called Nanzenji, and it's a Zen Buddhist temple. And putting a seismic accelerometer on this temple bell, it sort of revealed how this bell is alive as an object and is actually permanently, perpetually responding to just the ambient sound in the garden. And in the Buddhist psychology, this was like a very powerful idea, because the Buddhist monk who gave me access to the bell, when I put the headphones on him and he heard this, I mean, the look on his face, I wish I had a picture of his face here instead of the bell. But this is the sound of silence in Kyoto. Is there sound?
The forward arrow.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, right there. No?
There it is. The Richard Serra sculpture does this, actually. I also did a similar recording in New York City on the top of, with the bells on the top of the old MetLife Tower, 23rd Madison Avenue. For 100 years, it They were Westminster chimes that kept time for a century. It became a luxury hotel, and they don't ring the bells anymore. But so that's my work with vibrations of living and structures. I did an exhibition in Tate Modern in London in 2006 where I took the Millennium Bridge, which is a pedestrian suspension bridge, and installed a large network of accelerometers to pick up the vibrations of the cables and how the bridge was affected by wind, weather, people walking on it. And this is the sound of the London Millennium Bridge that was transmitted in real time inside of the turbine hall of the Tate. And here is another version. Oh, that's a different bridge. Okay. So we just left London and we went to Lisbon, where I had a big project about a very iconic bridge in the entrance of the Lisbon harbor called the 25th of April Bridge, which is named after the revolution that overthrew Salazar in the 60s, I think. And I did this big kind of media deconstruction of this bridge in a wonderful contemporary art museum. And the first time I set foot on this bridge, I was on this catwalk under the roadway, and I was completely kind of blown away by this. And this is how the exhibit looked. It was an 800 square meter oval gallery. There were 7 channels of video with these large hanging screens. And then there was a 32 channel sound system that surrounded this that was taking live sound from the bridge and moving it in the space. And this, one of my favorite sort of camera on the bridge was the one on the very top of the south tower of the bridge that had this remarkable view. And inside the museum, it was projected onto this really large hanging screen that was on a 45-degree angle, and it was kind of like a video sculpture. And I actually placed the camera on the top of the bridge, and I was very proud of that. The thing you can't see in this video is people, there were cushions on the backside of the screen. So people, especially young people, would go there and lie on these cushions and look at the backside of this image. So, whoops. So I'm going from Lisbon to a project I'm working on for the Venice Architecture Biennale, theme of which is sustainability. And I have a commission from an organization called the International Renewable Energy Agency, and they commissioned me to travel around and make sound recordings and videos of renewable energy power sources. And they asked me to do this in a non-documentary style and just to try to create some excitement. So the oldest geothermal power plants in the world are in western Tuscany, about west of Pisa, for example, 100 kilometers west of Pisa. And in these landscapes, everywhere you see this energy kind of just coming out of the ground. And so it was a challenge for me to do this because it really forced me to kind of define a relationship to the moving image in a way I had never done before. And so I approached recording video the way I record sound. And the sound in this is from accelerometers buried in this landscape. And the video is just long video stills with the same view recorded at different times of day, just layered on top of each other. And this is a mystical hydroelectric landscape in the northern part of Portugal in the mountains. And the sound is from a hydrophone immersed in the outflow of the hydroelectric power plant. And the image is gazing at this landscape and superimposing a video of the water moving out of the power plant. And this is maybe the oddest of them all. This is also in Portugal. This was in a nature reserve near the pilgrimage city of Fatima that happened to have a bunch of wind turbines in it. And I made some video. This video consists of several individual videos of different wind turbines and a recording I made of birds at sunrise in this nature reserve, mixed with the sounds of the turbines and the images. And this was another climbing adventure. This was a wind turbine in the very north of England that I had the opportunity to actually climb up into the very top of it and be directly under this spinning turbine blade, gazing down at a windswept field. You can see the wind moving this field of grass. And going back to Tuscany, this is a geothermal cooling tower that was really interesting. It was surrounded by all this sort of steam coming out of the earth around it. And so that's all.
Okay, so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So our last but not least is McAfee, who is visiting us from the Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. For those of you who don't know, it's the only university in the country for the deaf. And as we were in the world, wow. Okay. And to add to this, as we're talking, I realized that Max Kazemzadeh, who is in a PhD program with Roy Ascott and actually collaborated with me on this project, is her chair. So how small is the world? Welcome, Michelle.
Okay, hi everybody, thanks for having me. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Milan Conference in 1980, and that was a time when the world decided to come together, discuss deaf education, people from England, Germany, France, Italy, the United States, and there were only 5 delegates from the United States who decided to come and congregate in Italy. So they decided that they were asking really what's the best method to teach deaf individuals, oral or signed language. So they decided that oral was better. They banned sign in school, and what that meant was that there were no deaf educators essentially in school to teach deaf kids. So it had to be a hearing person because, obviously they had to teach them how to talk. So, okay, right? That was kind of the okay, and that was the death in the sense of ASL and death of the deaf community and signing, and it was because of that decision at the Milan Conference. And so there were only 164 delegates who were there to make that decision, and only one of those delegates were deaf, and it was from Kindle. And that was at Gallaudet University. It was set up that there was a school there, an elementary school for deaf individuals, and he was superintendent for the deaf elementary school at Kendall. And so I guess he didn't know, he must have lip read or something, but didn't know. Right. And so at that conference, they banned any kind of access. So they weren't really able to watch, or he wasn't able to watch or give support. There was the only one deaf person there, and it was a private meeting between hearing individuals. And so one of those delegates, the most ardent of them, was Alexander Graham Bell. And he was really the one who led the charge and said something like deaf children should be speaking and not signing. And so it was kind of ironic because his mom and his daughter, I believe, were deaf. And so it was like his wife too was deaf. So it was a surprising kind of, I wasn't sure. It was amazing to see, like, growing up with Bella as a wife, a husband, and a father, right? Anyway. So let's fast forward to CRISPR, 1987. And it's a genetic testing. So technical issues. But anyway, so CRISPR. So set up right, it was discovered in 1987, and it's essentially a genetic technology that edits, is capable of removing genes, and one of the focuses here is that they can remove disabilities, right, or deafness and other disabilities. So the United States presently is trying to borrow a law from the United Kingdom, which says that if an individual is pregnant, or is going through a natural birth, or through in vitro fertilization, if they decide, if they do a test prior birth, it's a requirement basically to make sure that the child is okay and that there's no gene, for example, that could cause deafness. So if there is a deaf gene, then essentially what happens is you're required to remove it, or else health insurance won't cover anything related to that disability. So, so it's considered that it's considered an elective disability, which means that you'd be paying out of pocket for the remainder of your growth. So all my life, hearing people have always tried to put me in a kind of circle, right, to fit in. But obviously, I don't fit in it. So I have interpreters here. I can't really communicate with all of you unless we trade notes back and forth. They're interpreters, or maybe we can type. But essentially, we can just keep it to small talk, right? That's kind of the maximum. So my art project is obviously based on my experience as a deaf person, and so my focus is on communication, sound, and language. So this video is, what did I decide to do? I thought it was I thought I pretty much knew most of the time. Like, I get what hearing people saying, but what I didn't realize how much I was missing out on until I made this particular video. And I made it when I was in graduate school. I think it was, started around, it was a starting point towards communication, discovering sounds, things I wasn't getting. So what I want to do is I want to ask the hearing people in the room, if you could tell me your first crush. From, it's supposed to be like this sweet, funny, lovey-dovey kind of experience. So here's what happened instead.
First crush. I remember my first crush. Yes, Tara. Making out with her in a blanket in the backyard of my parents' house. I was 9. She was like 11.
Tell me about your first crush.
Well, it really and I happened to see him, I'm old now, and I happened to see him just last year, and I still had a crush on him. So I never got over it. But still a wonderful guy. Good idea. My first crush was a good idea. But
My first crush was in kindergarten. It was a boy named Bobby. He was in my kindergarten class. He was also my best friend, and my sisters would make fun of me because I was hang out with boys. But with his parents, and it's all.
Woo! Racy.
That was my first crush, Bobby.
Okay, so the point, I'm guessing a lot of what they're saying, I was missing a lot of what they're saying, and I knew some of what they're saying, but I was using the wrong word. I thought that was what they were telling me, and I had to make these assumptions, so the communication was just missed. So the next one, this next video, I spent my art residency in Greece last fall. So I was on sabbatical for that. So I stayed there for 5 weeks, and I focused on putting together a group of my travels from one place to another, and I kept adding to it while I was there. And so I got to see some famous Greek artists, and of course everybody hearing, and it's just me. Some of them spoke English, but some of the famous one famous Greek artist, Mima, he didn't know English either. So one of the interpreters wrote down, "You didn't miss much. It was just a lot of talking." I was like, all right, thanks. So, but that became sort of the title of my next video. So what I did was, the next time I saw him, I asked the director of the art residency to write down my question in Greek, and I went up, just the two of us went to go speak. He had Greek, and no English, and I had English and no Greek, and so, or just ASL, so sat down together and I recorded his voice, and then I put his voice in the background of my videotape. So to speak, it's for American people specifically in my position, right, which is to say that you don't know really what's being said at all. Do you hear something?
Ποιο είναι το στοιχείο που δημιουργεί καλλιτέχνη?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
ένας άνθρωπος όταν γεννιέται μέσα σε ένα περιβάλλον επηρεάζεται πάρα πολύ από το περιβάλλον. Μέσα στο περιβάλλον υπάρχουν στοιχεία τέχνης. Όπως η ίδια η φύση είναι ένα κομμάτι της τέχνης. Ο επηρεασμός αυτό του δημιουργεί μια ιδιαίτερη επαφή και αυτός απλουθάει αυτά τα βήματα. Τι είναι τέχνη? Κατά άλλους είναι η αίσθηση της στιγμής, κατά άλλους είναι η ομορφιά του περιβάλλοντος, κατά άλλους είναι η αίσθηση των όγκων, όπως είναι η γλυπτική. Η γλυπτική, δουλεύοντας στη γλυπτική, δεν κάνεις τίποτα άλλο από να δημιουργείς εσοχές μέσα στην ύλη και εξοχές, φως και άκρη.
So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So every time we have these lasers, I'm amazed at how there's some connecting thread, even though a lot of times people come in because of situations. Bill was visiting, Haytham is coming, etc. And you would think that these things are disconnected, but I was just thinking, no. What we saw was bread around the world, the kind of social communication and miscommunication and a kind of dealings with technology, with the mechanical Turk. And then we went into surveillance, which is also dealing with travel and with people going all around the world and being stuck in these boxes and lack of communication, right? But again, dealing with travel, maybe travel ban and the ridiculous idea of that. Then we traveled around the world to listen to sound recorded by the amazing Bill Fontana, and really making a point of how important it is to listen. It's actually probably the most important thing that we can learn in the world. To end with someone who doesn't hear, and to really think about how much we have a disability, those of us who hear, that we're not listening, and how limited our communication is. Because we really are living in a world, planet, global planet culture. And there's still this idea of nationhood and separation that's tearing us apart. So it's so touching to end with Michelle. I really am very pleased. Thank you, Michelle. And now we just hang out and eat bread. So, and for those of you who missed, go see Haytham's show, or those of you who want to take a second look, because the artist is here only for 2 more days, and then he's off to Cairo. Anyway, thanks for coming.